All right, welcome to This Week in Exercise Science Lab. We're talking about the half kneeling hip stretch and lunge stretch. Why? Because we are focusing on everything involving the hip and the pelvis. So one of our goals is either one, improving our hip extension, our hip drive, whether squatting, jumping, walking stairs, just walking down our hallway, which requires two things. It requires the strength of our glutes, right? We need our hips to press our leg back here, right, as we're walking. And we also need the mobility in our anterior hip to allow that hip extension to occur. When people lose that hip extension, it causes other problems up and down the chain. So what do? We do what we did this week in lab, or a couple weeks ago in lab. Number one was a runner's pose. All right, a runner's pose is going to be here. I'm going to come up and get that stretch there. So kind of an elongated or lengthening kind of running motion there. So I'm going to pick up my back leg. All right, I'm going to stay nice and tall. I might tuck my tail a little bit, contract my left glute, maybe my left quad even for support, or I can come down here and get a stretch. All right, so that's what we're talking about. We're going to go through a couple things. Let's see. On our lab report, what we talked about, number one, note stretching and mobility must be mindful and intentional. All right, don't watch someone else in the gym or some YouTube video just do this stretch. Be aware of what you're feeling. Where is it stretching, right? What muscle are you hitting and why are you hitting that, as I described at the beginning of the video. Number two, isolate the area and then integrate the global pattern. So we're isolating a hip flexor stretch, which is right here in my anterior hip, but then we integrate that into a walking, lunging, running pattern, whatever our goal is. All right, so we isolate the area. Isolate the area and then integrate it into whatever pattern we're looking for. Finally, we'll talk about some progressions and regressions. So, what muscles or muscle groups are we targeting with this movement? So, whether I get this half kneeling stretch, so this is what we call high kneeling. This is a half kneeling stretch. So, a half kneeling stretch. What we're going to do? Get in this position here. Listen to your body. This might be enough. You might have enough of a stretch down your quadricep. Your rectus femoris attaches to your pelvis. It runs all the way down your thigh, wraps around your kneecap, and attaches to your shin bone, your tibia. If that feels tight, this might be enough. If you're feeling a lot of quadricep stretch, just hang out here. All right. And then if you want to increase this hip stretch, you want to hit your other hip flexors, then we will stay tall, always staying tall. Number one cue here on the sheet. And then we're going to come forward with our right knee, staying tall. And two things I'm going to focus on is number one, I'm going to contract this left glute, which should relax the opposite muscles. We call that reciprocal inhibition. My glute contracts in back, it relaxes and kind of releases, opens up, different phrases we use. My left anterior hip, so I can ease forward into that, being under control. All right. And then in order to increase that stretch even more is I can do a little extra posterior tilt or tuck my tail. All right. Stay tall, contract this glute, tuck my tail, and that increases the stretch. All right. And what we're looking for as far as a movement fault is that we're not dropping into this lordotic. We call this lordosis, lordotic spine here. Okay. We'll do that for two reasons. Number one, if that stretches a lot on my hip flexor, that's psoas muscle, all right? So we talk about origins and insertions. There's the psoas complex, or the iliopsoas complex, which is actually your psoas major and minor muscle, and your iliacus. Both of them insert into the lesser trochanter of your femur. The iliacus is going to originate all along. It's kind of a fanned out muscle in your ilium, right? And then your psoas is going to connect to the transverse processes of your first 5 lumbar vertebrae. Which means if I fall into the stretch and it begins to tug on my lower back, it's because that psoas muscle is tight and it's just tugging my lower back forward because that's sort of the anchor of that muscle. All right. The other reason I might fall into that lordotic posture is because I'm not engaging my rectus abdominis, my transverse abs, my core, right? I'm not maintaining a good line of posture here, the 2-hand rule between my diaphragm and my pelvic floor. Right? I'm dropping into this position. So keep your abs engaged, your glute contracted, and then ease into the stretch. All right? The structure that you don't want to quote unquote hang on, when I say don't hang on your meat, is your iliofemoral ligament. There's also your pubofemoral ligament. It's a horizontal ligament but your iliofemoral ligament sits in front too. And sometimes what we avoid is people just kind of bounce into the stretch. Oh yeah, that feels good, or they'll kind of drop this way. We saw all kinds of stuff in classes, and if I see 30 athletes stretching out, and they're just kind of bouncing into these different stretches, you want to avoid that. Be mindful, be intentional, know what the heck you're doing, know why you're stretching what you're stretching. All right? So you can tilt, contract. We talked about that. We talked about this. What do we want to avoid? What common movement pattern are we mimicking with this stretch? Well, mostly a lunge, right? So someone cannot, if you have a client or patient working on some sort of inline lunge, they may have a hard time. They may feel their knee, they may feel their hip, they may feel some tightness of the lower back, right? But that's the position we're working on. So I might have somebody regress to just this inline lunge stance here, this archetype, this position. We may assess. We can do a reverse lunge. If we hold the weight, that's going to progress up even more. All right, forward lunges, reverse lunges, walking lunges, etc. All right. So a couple things to think about with that half kneeling stretch, but that's such a great stretch. Whether you do it half kneeling, whether you do that entire runner's pose, or you can just stand and get kind of a split stance. Same cues. Stay tall, tuck your tail, contract that glute, and get that stretch there. All right? Try those out. Tell me what you think below, and I'll see you next time.